Okie dokie. It is recording as of right now. So, Jamie, take it away, please.
All right. Thank you. Thank you very much, Scott. Hello, everybody. Again, welcome to the DC SharePoint user group. My name is Jamie Willis-Rose, and I am going to be talking about PowerApps. I'm doing a one-on-one session. A little bit of housekeeping. If you want to talk, just unmute your mic and jump in. If you're not talking, if you could just mute your mic, that would be appreciative. We're a relatively small group tonight, so you can chime in anytime. If you feel more comfortable using chat, you can put your questions in there, and I'll answer them at the end of the presentation. All right, I'm going to turn off my camera so we can focus on the presentation. All right, so this is who I am. My name is Jamie Willis-Rose. I'm a Power Platform developer. I came to PowerApps through SharePoint. It's appropriate that I'm here at the SharePoint DC user group talking about this. I started with SharePoint 2010, and I graduated to SharePoint Online, and I was one of the first people who clicked those little PowerApps and Flow buttons that showed up one day in my tenant. That's how I kind of discovered PowerApps and what is now Power Automate, formerly Flow. Also dabble a little bit in Power BI. I recently became a consultant, and I work for both commercial, nonprofit, and government industries. My current company is Applied Information Sciences, or AIS. It's a great company. If you guys are interested in knowing more about it, I'll have the URL here in the slide deck. It's a great place to work. I love it there. Great people. So definitely shoot me a note if you have any questions about it, about working there, and I'd be happy to put in a good word for you. You can follow them on Twitter, on Facebook. They have a LinkedIn page, and they also do regular blogs. So it's a good place to keep up to date on the latest. Objectives. So what are we talking about today? Well, I'm going to talk about what is PowerApps. I'll be talking about why we use PowerApps. Then I get to the demos. Everybody wants demos. So I'm going to do two big demos. The first one is just a simple building an app from scratch. So building an app from a SharePoint list. And then I'm going to build it from scratch. Sort of compare and contrast the two methods. As I go, I'll be talking about some best practices. And then finally at the end, we'll do a Q&A. So this is Bob. Everybody knows a Bob. Bob loves Excel. Loves Excel. He loves so much that he likes to share Excel documents with everyone he knows and works with. He likes to email them to people. He likes to share them via OneDrive. And as a result, there's a lot of Excel spreadsheets at Bob's organization. Thanks, Bob. Don't be like Bob. Then one day, Bob came and saw a presentation like this about PowerApps, and he thought, what if I use PowerApps instead of Excel? That's a good idea, Bob. First, we have to define it. So what is it? Well, PowerApps is a lot of things, but there's several key pieces to it. There are Canvas apps, there are model-driven apps, there are portals, and there's a new, relatively recent addition called the AI Builder. I'm not going to get into every single one of these today. I highly recommend using the links that I have at the end of the presentation to take a deeper dive. There's a lot of great resources online. There's other presentations, and of course, you can ask anyone on the call today, including Anton, if you have questions about some of these other items on my screen here. So why should you use PowerApps? Well, according to Gartner, PowerApps from Microsoft is a leader in the low-code application platform. It's over here in the upper right. Let me use my laser pointer here. So you can see here, Microsoft is up here in the quadrant, leading the way as far as low code goes. Sorry about that. So I highly recommend following this link. You can get the full report from Gartner talking about why and what makes Microsoft so good compared to some of its competitors. Compare and contrast for yourself, figure out if your organization hasn't committed to any particular low-code platform. It talks about why you might want to use PowerApps. Today, I want to focus only on Canvas apps. So these other three are really important, really cool. There's some great presentations out there that I can show you guys about after this demo is done. But today, I'm focusing only on Canvas apps. Why Canvas apps? Well, number one, if you have Office 365, more than likely you have Canvas apps. It's included with most Office 365 subscriptions. Number two, it has a really nice WYSIWYG, what you see is what you get designer. So if you're familiar with, say, PowerPoint, you can actually very easily drag and drop things onto a canvas and create an app that way. It's low code, not no code, low code. Yes, there are some functions that you'll need to use, but there's a lot of great references out there, including ones from Microsoft, which I'll have links to. So you don't have to memorize these particular functions. And so when you have a question about something, you can find the function and use it relatively easily. It's cross-platform, so it's very useful that way. So when you create an app, you're not just creating an app for one thing, you're creating an app for multiple devices. So you can create an app that will be used on a phone, on a tablet, on your PC. So that's really useful. I think this slide's actually outdated. I think it's now over 300 connectors. And when I say connectors, what I mean is basically PowerApps is not just limited to what you have in your Microsoft Office subscription. So it's not just limited to what you have you're paying for Microsoft for. You can also connect it to other services. So if you have data stored elsewhere on, say, a third-party system, you can get to that data and use it inside a Power App. It also integrates really well with Teams and Power BI. I'm not going to have time to demo that today, but again, I highly recommend if your organization is using Teams. I know a lot of people are using Teams now. You can do some really cool things taking Power Apps and integrating them directly into Teams. And likewise with Power BI, if your organization has a Power BI practice, perhaps they're using Power BI reporting, you can build Canvas apps that go right into Power BI reports. So let's start with my demo. I'm going to start by converting an existing Excel spreadsheet into a Power App. So this is my first demo. So here's my problem. As I mentioned, Bob loves Excel. Bob created a lot of Excel spreadsheets that look a little like this. Don't worry too much about the specifics of the data. Just know that they're very similar. They look a lot like this. So I'm going to take one of these spreadsheet examples and I'm going to turn it into a Power App. To start with, I need to actually create a data source. Now, you could use Excel as the data source, but that's not a best practice. So what I'm going to do first is take that Excel spreadsheet and turn it into a SharePoint list. So here I have a SharePoint list, and the first thing you have to do is format it as a table. It doesn't matter what kind of formatting you use. That's not really what's important. What's important is it just has to be formatted as a table, because that enables the next functionality, which is the export to SharePoint. So I can export the table to a SharePoint list. I click this button, and then from here, I have to pick my SharePoint list. If you don't see the list, the URL in the list, you can just type it in. So I type in PowerApps 101. Then I need to give the name of my SharePoint list. Supply request. And then next. You can verify the data types. If you don't see the data types correctly, you can change them. I think that's fine. I'm going to click finish. You see very quickly it's done. It would take a lot longer, obviously, if you had more records. And here's the finished product, a SharePoint list that looks something like this. All the data now is in SharePoint. Now, this isn't the only way you can do it, but it's a way. If you're starting from scratch, you don't have the SharePoint list already created, that's a really great way to start. If you already have the SharePoint list created, the other option you have is either A, using copy and paste, kind of old school, or B, if you want to experiment with how to automate, you can do some pretty cool things where you can actually take data from an Excel spreadsheet and move it into an existing SharePoint list. I'm not going to demo that. That's outside the scope of this demo. But just keep that in mind. If you already have existing SharePoint lists and you want to move data into it, it is possible. Before I continue, I just want to make a case for the Common Data Service, or CDS. That's not really what I'm going to be talking about today. Obviously, this is the SharePoint user group, and most of you are here because you're using SharePoint. And CDS is not included with Office 365. It is an additional licensing charge, but it is a much better data source. and then a SharePoint list. SharePoint lists are not relational, and CDS is a much more robust data source. So if you're building really complex, mission-critical business apps, highly recommend looking into CDS and looking at those options. I'll have links at the end to help you if you want to learn more about that as well. All right, so then we have the next step, building the app. So here's my list back in SharePoint. There's a little icon here. It says Power Apps. I'm going to click Create an App. It's going to bring up this dialog. I have to type in a name for my app. It's going to check and make sure this app doesn't already exist. It has to be a unique name. Looks like I'm good. I'm going to click Create. And then it's going to automatically create my app for me. Now, when you do this, sorry, I have to click this as well. When I do this, keep in mind that when you do it from SharePoint, it will create a mobile phone layout. There's ways you can change that if you need to after the fact, but just be aware that by default, anything you create inside SharePoint will be in the mobile layout, which is this shape and size. I'm going to preview it for you. So here's my first screen. It shows me a list of all the items. Then I can click Edit, and I can actually make a change I want to. I can cancel, I can go back. I have a lot of options, and this is all done for me with the one click of a button. So you have a working app. It's not perfect. You might need some tweaking, but if you want to, if you're fresh to Power Apps, this is a great way to get started. So the next thing I want to talk about is building an app from scratch and some best practices. So I'm going to kind of go off what we just talked about and now take a deeper dive, looking at sort of how that app we just saw was actually made and build it from scratch. The first thing you want to do is come into Power Apps and you want to click Create from Blank. Now you have a choice to make. First, you have to type in the name. Oh, it has to be a unique name. So I'm going to give it I'll say V2. Then I have to choose between tablet and phone. This is you have to make this choice right now. The Canvas apps are technically not responsive, although you can make them more responsive with a little bit of know-how. For today, just know you have to make a choice. So think about what your audience is and who you expect them to be using your app, and make the choice that's best for you. I'm going to switch to tablet just so we have more room to see what we're doing. All right. Best practice tip number 1, save early, save often. It works for everything, including Power Apps. It's just good sound advice. So the first thing I like to do when I'm creating an app is make sure I save it. So there's the name I typed in. If I want to change it, I can change it. It is best to set your name now. If you need to change it later, you can, but it's not as easy. You can set the icon. You can pick an icon from your computer if you want. You can set the background color. You can add a description if you want to. It's probably a good idea. I didn't add it yet, but I can come back to that. Then I click Save. And I can actually confirm the app name. Again, it's easier to set it now than have to change it later. So it is technically possible. I'm saving it. This takes a second. Excellent. And then I'm just going to go back here, and this is sort of best practice tip number, we'll say 1.1. Always give your apps a description. Very good advice. Keep in mind that other people will see this description when they're looking at apps that they have access to. So it's always good to tell them what it is. And then you can just use your keyboard, Control S to save after you saved it the first time, and therefore moving forward. All right, so now I have my app, but I need to actually connect to that SharePoint list. Remember, the last time we did this, we started with the data, and it automatically did this for us. So now we're doing it from scratch. We have to actually tell the app what is the data source. There's several ways to do this. This is one way. So I'm going to come here to Data Sources. It's going to say right there, there's no CDS because I'm in my default environment. So the default environment, generally speaking, will not have access to CDS. I'm going to use SharePoint. I'm going to verify that I have the right account. I'm using Bob's account. It should be obviously your name, your email address for whatever tenant you're using. If you don't see the URL there, you can paste it in. Otherwise, I see what I want, and then just select the list and then connect. And again, this isn't the only way to add a data source, but it is one way. Quick word about environments. So what are environments? Environments are canvas or basically containers for various parts of the Power Apps experience. So you can put in canvas apps, model-driven apps, flows, portals, and of course CDS. And as a result, what happens is in any given tenant, you can have multiple environments, and those environments help sequester data and apps and flows so that users only have access to what they need and what they should have access to. So in this diagram, you can see the gentleman in the middle, or gentlewoman, sorry. The person in the middle has access to all three environments, whereas the person on the left only has access to the left side, the USA environment, and the person on the right side only has access to the Australian environment. If you want more, there's a link there. It talks more about environments. This is obviously this assumes you're actually paying for PowerApps. This is not included with Office 365. So that's just a sort of caveat on that. But it's definitely something worth thinking about if you want to really get the most out of your PowerApps, is to leverage environments. All right, so now I have my app, but it doesn't have anything on it. So you have to start populating the screens. And PowerApps are basically divided up into screens. Each screen is like a page, and on each screen you put controls. And these are some of the controls, and I want to walk you through sort of what's available in PowerApps. And I should say this changes. So what's available now may not be the same. They make a new availability soon. All right, so here we go. Going to insert, and so options include a label, a button. There's text controls like that. There's input controls, so you can take various inputs. There's galleries, which display multiple items at a time. There's forms for inputting things. There's different ways you can do media. There's charts. There's icons. And actually, if you scroll all the way down to the bottom, there's also shapes. So this should say icons and shapes, but it just says icons. You can even do custom components, which I'm not going to have time today to talk about, but if you want to get into that, that's very exciting. You can actually create your own components. On the left-hand side there, they've added this new option where you can just click the plus button, and they have the same controls, just listed differently. So either way is fine. So the first thing I want to do is add a gallery. So I'm going to take gallery, and I'm going to insert a gallery in, and I'm going to select my data source. When I select the data source, it's going to automatically assign fields. Now my layout, it can be changed to any one of these prefab layouts. You can also customize the gallery yourself. But there's even a better way to do this. So if you want to, you can actually take advantage of templates that are built into PowerApps. So what you do here is come up to new screen, and look at these templates. You've got scrollable, list, success, tutorial, email, people, meeting, calendar. So I would strongly suggest starting here. The odds are what you're trying to do, someone else has already done before. So start with the template. There's other templates as well, but I'm not gonna have time to show you all the templates. But this one is really nice. It gives you a gallery, which you can then connect to the data source, and then you can format and change the fields how you like. So if I want to set these fields, I can set this to, I don't know, let's see, request dates, and then maybe I'll change, instead of email, maybe I'll do name. Yeah. Just, whatever you need. And then I'm just going to delete this screen. I don't need this. All right, very good. And then I'm going to do another screen. This time I'm just going to do a blank screen. And now I need to, so on the first screen, Now I have a way to show all my items, but now I need to have a way to interact with a specific item. To do that, I'm going to use a form. So with forms, the rule I want you to remember is always use edit, don't use display. Why is that? Because edit forms can do both. Edit forms can display and edit, but display forms can only display. So it's just, in my opinion, it's my opinion, personal opinion, it's just best to use edit forms because you can use them for everything. So I've connected my data source. It automatically adds all the fields, although if it doesn't add the fields you want or it adds too many fields, you can adjust that. You can change the layout. It's to different columns. I switched it to one. You can also change the layout to something like that or back to vertical. I think vertical is better. You can then adjust the height and width. Now I'm going to take these two items here and I'm going to use Shift and click, and I'm actually going to copy this. So you can actually copy and paste just like you could in, say, Word or PowerPoint. And then you can just paste them in. So it's very nice, easy to use interface. And I'll just adjust my height to fill up the full screen. All right. So now I have two screens, but they're not connected to each other. I need to find a way so that whatever I'm doing in the gallery affects the form and vice versa. So what I'm going to do is come in here to my form. I'm going to change the item, and I'm actually going to tell the item, this is the specific item that I want this form to display. I want you to display whatever I have selected in the gallery on the first screen. And there's an option for that called selected. When I do that, boom, there you have it. So far, so good. But then I need to go back to the gallery, and I need to teach the gallery, hey, when I click something, I want you to go to that form. So there's several ways to do this. There's the onSelect property. There's also in the action tab, you can select navigate, and it'll automatically choose a screen, although you can change that, and it adds a transition as well. You can also use the onSelect property there. And then once I have that set up, I can come over here and hit play. And just like that, it works. And you can turn off those notifications. You don't need to keep seeing those. Okay, so now I've connected the two screens together, sort of. I need to do some more though, because obviously if I want to work with this app, I need to be able to go back and forth. I need to actually be able to take action on things. So let's talk a little bit about form modes. I mentioned earlier how the edit form can do both display and edit. So let's talk about that. So when I take a look at this form, I'm going to select it, and you'll see on the right-hand side there are several modes. There's edit, new, and view. You can set the default mode to any one of these three. Edit is the current record you have selected. View is a read-only version of that. And new is a blank form that would be used for entering a new record. So I think the best default view, generally speaking, is view. So when people come to the form, they can look at it, but not necessarily make changes. To make changes, I'm going to add an icon or a button, and I'm going to set this one to white so it shows up better. And this is going to be my edit button. And what I can do is I actually can use a function that will change the form's view mode. So there's a function that's part of the PowerApps thing. Oh, sorry, best practice. I forgot that was coming up here. Best practice, always use comments in your code. You can use forward slashes, or you can use slash, asterisk, asterisk, slash to surround your comments. Leave comments for yourself so that you know what's going on. Leave comments for future people who come along after you so they know what you did. And of course, leave comments for yourself so that 6 months or a year from now, when you come back and have to fix this app or change it, you remember what the heck you were doing. All right, so what I'm doing right now is I am setting this up to toggle. So if it's in view mode, I'm going to use the edit form function to switch the form into edit mode. And if it's not, I'm going to switch it into view mode. And then let's just move this over a little bit. I'm going to practice. So there you have it. As I toggle it, it toggles back and forth between edit and view mode. Another best practice that I'll talk about is reusing controls. So there's a limit right now in Canvas apps of about 500 controls per app. That may change over time, but it's still best practice not to get anywhere near that. So if you're building a really complicated app, one of the ways you can keep that count down is by trying to reuse controls using functions. So for example, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to reuse this edit button so it doesn't just edit. So for the icon, I can actually change this so that in certain situations, it's an edit button. In other situations, it's something else. Using the if statement, I'm going to check the form mode. And if it's in edit mode, I'm going to set it to edit. And if it's not, I'm going to set it to cancel. Okay, let's preview it. Oh, see, I got it backwards here. I got my logic backwards. So let me fix that. So I'm going to come back here and I'm going to change this to view. So now I've reversed the logic. Let's try this again. Okay, so now when I click edit, it goes into edit mode. When I click cancel, it goes back into view mode. So there you go. So now I have one button set up, but let's add some other buttons. I'm going to add in a back icon. So we have a back. And if you prefer to use images, you could use images if you wanted to. There's an image control. I just like using the native icons built into PowerApps. But if your organization has its own style, you could certainly keep that style. All right, so that back button worked. And then I'm going back and then back again. So far, so good. Everything seems to be working. Excellent. All right. Excellent, 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 excellent. All right, so let's go ahead and add to this screen. I want to add the ability to add a new item. So I'm going to use the plus button, and I want to actually say, oh, I want a new record. So to do that, I'm going to actually use two functions. One is new form, that sets the form into new mode, and then I'm going to navigate to that screen with the navigate function. And again, I have a list of all the functions I'm using at the end of this deck, so you don't have to memorize any of this. All right, so click that, and now I'm in new mode. So this is a new record. All right, but again, how do I save what I've done? So to do that, I need another button. This time I need a classic submit button. And you could do it doesn't have to be a submit button. It could be anything. It could be an icon if you prefer. But I'm going to use a classic button just to show you guys that that's possible. Come to insert, and there's a button right there. It says button. I'm going to add that in there, drag that down, and then I'm just going to change this to, and you can change the text to anything you want. I'm going to set it to just submit. You could say save, say whatever you want it to say. Then for my function, again, there's a function built in to PowerApps submit form. And that will just submit whatever you have in the form to that data source. And then I'm just going to adjust this. Excellent. All right, cool. So it's almost done. I do need to make a little bit of change to my cancel button though, because now I'm dealing with this form in 3 modes. So I'm going to make a slight tweak to my cancel button. So when I come into here and click on the cancel button, I'm going to I'm actually going to copy this code here. I'm going to want this in a minute. Yep. Okay. And then let's see, I'm going to go in and I'm going to change the onSelect property. So what I want to do is I want to handle what happens if the form is in new mode. So right now it's only going between 2 modes, but there's actually 3 possible modes. Now the if statement, what's really cool about the if statement in PowerApps is you can have multiple conditions in an if statement. So it's basically, you don't have to do separate if statements. You can do if, then, else, if, then, else, if, then, etc. So I'm not explaining it very clearly, but trust me, if you read the documentation, it'll be clearer. But as you can see here, I'm putting another condition in. This is the next condition. So if it's a new mode, then do this. In this case, I'm going to go back. Otherwise, else, do this. Oh yeah, and you can separate functions with a semicolon. So I can actually do 2 things. So if I click cancel, I can reset the form and with a semicolon. So those 2 functions will happen together. Also, best practice is to use some sort of success notification. You can do it any number of ways. If you want to do pop-ups, you can do pop-ups. I like just to use the built-in success screen. There's actually a really cool template you can use. Just come to new screen and click success, and it adds a success screen for you. And then all you have to do is connect your form to that screen. So I'm going to come to the form. And there's actually a function property called onSuccess. All I have to do is when the form is successful, go to the onSuccess screen. And I'll test it. I'm going to create a new record. Type in an email, some sort of just random information here. Test, tester, test, tester. Sorry, I'm such a slow typer. Test job, test department. All right, I think that's enough. Click submit, and then voila. So it's just good feedback. It gives people a sense of accomplishment. Obviously, there's more you could do, but and there's the actual data. All right. So I mentioned earlier the formulas. This will be in the slide deck, which I'll be sharing at the end. So this link here, I highly recommend you bookmark this in whatever browser you're using with PowerApps. I go to this almost every day, it seems like, especially if you're doing Canvas apps. Like, it's just really handy to have bookmarked. All the formulas that I went through and many, many more are right there. Easy to look through and find what you're looking for. Best practice number is probably more than number 2 at this point, but the next tip I want to talk about is using naming conventions. Highly, highly recommend taking the time if you're just starting with PowerApps in your organization to define the naming convention for your organization. There's an example naming convention which I will have for you at the end that you can use as a starting point that Microsoft created. But if you already have naming conventions in other platforms in your organization, you can use that. Maybe make some adaptations for PowerApps. Just be consistent across all your apps and across all your users. That way, as you work together and collaborate, and as you move on to other projects or other companies, your work is legible. The second tip, maybe tip part 2, is that when you are naming things, make sure you remember that screen names are actually read out loud by screen readers. So in order to make them more accessible, you should use plain language. So don't use weird abbreviations, put spaces in between words, and just keep that in mind. So and accessibility is definitely an issue if you're in the government space, but even if you're not, it's just a good best practice to try to make your apps accessible to all users. So I'm going to just demo this real quick. You can actually come in here and just rename things. I'm just going to give this a name. This is the URL to the actual guidelines, which I'll have again later on in the slide deck. Type it in, and I actually typed this wrong when I was doing this, so I apologize. It should be ICO, but if you want to say IOC, that's fine. Just be consistent. Be like Prince. Just keep doing it, and it's right then. So then we go and again, I'm not going to do all of them, but there you go. So I fast forward, and there you go. So this is all of them. I always like to add a suffix at the end with the screen name, just to differentiate, because sometimes you have the same control on multiple screens. So it helps just to keep track of which version of a particular control it is. Like headers, for example, you might have the same header on multiple screens. Some additional features to talk about. You can actually use the refresh function. There's a little icon that's built into PowerApps, and there's a refresh function. It's probably a good idea to include something like this in your app, your final app. This will actually ping the data source, the underlying data source, and check it for updates. So good to have in your app. Another thing that's good to have is the ability to search. So there's a search function. You can actually search using this text box that's already been added. And I can just basically say, I want you to use whatever's in this text box. I want you to search the data source, and I want you to search these specific columns. So you can pick multiple columns to search. I'm going to pick, I don't know, let's see, item. There's a full name, sorry. And then, let's see here, department, and then I think item. Yeah, there we go. All right. Now you'll notice though, there's a squiggly blue line under the word full name, and that's a delegation warning. So if you see this, don't ignore it. It can be a problem. I'll talk more about that in a minute. But let's show you what happens when you use it. So when I type in CY, there's 2 results. If I type in pen, I get 1 result, and you might wonder why, but if I click on it, you'll see this person actually ordered if I scroll down, a pencil. So it actually searched the item and it found matching for pen. If I search LAPT, these are all the results, and these people ordered a laptop. And then again, delegation warnings should not be ignored. This is sort of my brief explanation. So delegation basically is a problem that happens, especially if you're using SharePoint, where some functions in SharePoint work where you send the request and the data source, i.e. SharePoint, will handle the function. So it'll actually do the work in the cloud and then return just what you need as far as the request goes. That's a delegable function. There's a small subset of the function in PowerApps that are delegable. A lot of them are not delegable depending on your data source, for example, SharePoint. In that case, what has to happen is the request has to go to SharePoint, and SharePoint has to send all the data back to the app. And then once the data is loaded into the app, then the function runs on the data that's been downloaded to the app. And there's a limit to that. By default, it's 500 records. You can change that to 2,000. So if you're using a large data source that's over 2,000 records, you're going to have a problem. There's ways around that. There's other people who are smarter than me that have come up with workarounds. But the best advice I can give you is if you have really big data sources, definitely learn about delegation and try your best to use delegable functions. And read up on that because it's important. Otherwise, your app and your end users will be grumpy. Next thing I want to talk about is the difference between saving, publishing, and sharing. So in order to get an app into production, quote unquote, you have to do all 3 steps. So I'll start with the first step, which is saving. I've already saved it once. Remember, save early, save often. You can actually add a version note. I didn't do that in this demo, but That's a great idea if you are working with other developers or even for yourself, just making a note of change. Next thing you do, you can click the publish button, or in this case, I'm going to click see all versions, and you can see here there were 7 versions saved. The latest version is saved here, but the first version that was published is this version 1. So this is the version that's available outside of the studio mode, the edit mode. And when I click play, what am I going to see? Nothing. Because remember, I started this from scratch, and version 1 had nothing. No controls, nothing. So if I want to actually see the work that I've just done, I have to publish it first. So again, this is the latest unpublished version. So what I want to do is I want to take this version and I want to publish it. And there's a couple ways you can publish apps. You can do it from the CL version screen. You can select the version and click publish this version. So if you're in this screen, you can do it from here. If you're back in PowerApps, which is where I'd recommend it, you can go and just click the publish button as soon as you click save. And then this comes up and select publish this version, but you're not done yet. Just because I publish it doesn't mean that anyone else can use it. It just means that it's now facing outwards, but it still has to be shared with people. Sorry, I'm just demoing here. This proves to you that I published version 7. So to do that, I'm going to click share. And again, there's more than one way to do this, but this is the one way to do it. Once that comes up, you have choices. You can share with everyone in your organization. If you do that, I would turn off email notifications. You don't need this unknown to everybody. If you don't want to share with everyone, which you might not want to, you could share it with security groups, security email groups, or you could pick individual users. I highly recommend for your own sanity that you look into the use of user groups, not user groups, security groups for sharing, so you don't have to manage the security permissions for your app. But don't have a lot more to talk about on that right now in my demo. Just remember, if you remember nothing else, is that sharing the app does not mean sharing the data. So even though I just clicked share, it doesn't mean that the person will get to use the app as you expect, because whatever data is connected to that app, they also have to have access to. So before you share the app with anyone, make sure you've shared the underlying data first. So in this case, SharePoint, make sure everybody who want to use the app has access to that SharePoint list. All right, so let's get on with it. Some more about best practices. As I mentioned earlier, I had some links. This is the white paper from Microsoft. I use this myself as my basis from what I use for naming conventions. I think it was a great starting point for me as I was getting started on PowerApps. I don't necessarily think you should change what you're doing if you already have a naming convention, but if you don't, this is where I would start and build off this for your organization. I mentioned accessibility guidelines. Making your app accessible is important, especially if you're in the federal space. And depending on what your organization's rules are, you may also be required to do it for your organization. It's just good best practice, though. PowerApps, Canvas apps have some native capabilities for checking for accessibility issues. So I didn't get a chance to demo that, but that's definitely a possibility. If your organization wants to learn more about adopting the Power Platform at scale, please check out my company's Power Platform Adoption Framework. This was created by IIS, but it's now an open source tool that's on GitHub. You can follow this link and learn about it. And if you want to contribute to it, like I said, it's on GitHub, so you can download it and read about it and make contributions to it. It's a community effort now, so please check it out. And if you guys know who Andrew Wells is, it's his baby, and he's my boss. So you can check it out and tell him I said hi. Some resources. If you're new to PowerApps, which some of you may be, highly recommend within PowerApps itself, there's actually training for PowerApps. So you can actually come into PowerApps and you can load up this Canvas app, and you can actually install this app and it'll actually walk you through some of the cool things you can do with Canvas apps right there in PowerApps, which is kind of cool. The things to check out: PowerApps, Power Platform Community. This includes Power BI, Power Apps, Power Automate, and the recently added Power Virtual Agents. So definitely check this out. Create yourself an account if you don't have one. This is the best place to go if you have questions. There's people on there, really, really smart people who are there who are answering questions. Some who work for Microsoft, some who are just MVPs like Anton, who are out there just looking for problems to solve. User groups. There, if you're in the DC area, now some of you aren't, but some of you are. These are the DC user groups. Not all of them, but the main ones that I'm a member of. Obviously, you know about the SharePoint user group because hello, here we are. There's also a DC Power Automate and PowerApps user group. We're hoping to have a meet up virtually at the end of April. I should have the details shortly. Anton, I'm not sure if we've got the full details. Anton's also a leader of that group. There's the DC Power Platform CRM D365 group. That's another mouthful. That group is led by Kylie Kaiser. She has, I believe, announced her next event, but follow that link and look for the details. That'll also be a virtual event, obviously, given the situations. But they also put out a call for speakers. So if you're interested in speaking, definitely check that out. She's on LinkedIn and on Twitter. And if you have, and they're not just looking for like long form speakers, but like, 10-minute demos. So if you just want to get your feet wet, if you have something you want to talk about, check it out. And then last but not least, Power BI. If you're new to Power BI or if you're an expert at Power BI, I highly recommend checking out the Power BI user group in DC. Again, they're likewise also doing a lot of virtual events. I believe they are trying to set up a virtual Power BI days training, which will be like a 4-hour training. They have not announced the date for that yet, but that would be something to look out for if you want to get into Power BI if you're not familiar with it. But there's some really great people on the Power BI user group, so definitely check that out. Related to that, if you are not in DC and the groups I just mentioned are not accessible to you, although nowadays everything's accessible thanks to COVID. If you want to actually someday eventually meet up in person, check out the powerplatformug.com URL, which will link you to the various Power Platform user groups that exist under the community Dynamic Communities banner that's accompanying Dynamic Communities. Also, a recent addition, if you haven't already, check out virtualeventhub.com. This was put together by Chris Huntingford, former MVP and now current Microsoft employee. This is for anything related to Microsoft, so not just Power Apps. It's the whole everything. You can actually subscribe to the calendar and put it on your device, so it's always with you. So if there's any virtual events happening in your neck of the woods, or more accurately, your time zone, whatever time of day you're in right now, you can add that calendar and you can look it up. And if there's an event happening and you happen to be awake and not in another meeting, you can join it. They do a lot of cool things. Some of it's learning events. Sometimes it's just happy hours if you just want to chat with people. Great way to meet people from all over the world. So definitely check that out. There is a PowerApps community call every third Wednesday of the month. I believe the next one is next week. There's a link here to download the ICS file, and then you can find recordings of previous calls on YouTube. Highly recommend that as well. The gentleman who created the white paper that I showed you earlier for coding guidelines, naming conventions, his name is Todd Baginski, and he usually runs the community call. And that is a great guy to follow on all social platforms. He is very smart and knows a lot. And so definitely check out that community call and some of the older community call videos. Then we have Power Addicts. Anton is a Power Addict. I'm a Power Addict. You can be a Power Addict too. All it takes is putting hashtag Power Addict somewhere in one of your tweets, and then you're in. It's not a very selective club. But you're in. Welcome. But definitely follow that hashtag on Twitter. Check it out. They do regular meetups as well, virtual meetups even before COVID. So keep your eyes peeled for announcements about that. Hopefully there'll be more of those as we go forward. If you are brand new to PowerApps and you just got a taste of it today, and you want to know more, there's this great thing called App in a Day. This link here will take you to details about it. Obviously, given the current climate, getting an App in a Day in person training is not really feasible, but there are people out there who are hosting virtual App in a Days. So you can check and see if someone out there is doing a free one virtually. You might get lucky and find one that works for you in your time zone. And if you're not, you can download the materials. They're free, and you can actually walk it through it yourself. It's not as fun or exciting as doing it with a class and with a trainer. But if you really want to, get your hands dirty, sorry, it's a good way to start. Additional resources, again, this will all be in the slide deck when I share it. So these are great resources, links to videos and blog posts and other resources. A whole section here, a whole slide on delegation. As I said, it's a big issue. Couldn't get into it really in depth, but it's something to think about. Finally, remember Bob. Bob, he loved Excel, but then he discovered PowerApps and everybody loved him for it. So let's all be like Bob. Let's discover PowerApps and let's build more PowerApps. Let's all learn. All right, so I'm gonna check the chat and turn on my camera. All right. So, how are we doing? Anybody still here? That's a question. All right.
You're doing well, man.
All right.
Doing well.
Any questions from the peanut gallery? Feel
If
free.
anyone has a maybe a burning question, there's one.
Can you use PowerApps with Python or open source? Ooh, that's an interesting question. So I not as familiar with the Power Platform, PowerApps. Is it Power Platform Component Framework? PCF?
Oh yeah, the PowerApps PCF.
PCF, yeah. So there's a thing called PCF. I'm not sure if it's PowerApps Component Framework or Power Platform Component Framework. I forget now. But that is the way professional developers can create components for PowerApps that can be used in Canvas apps and in some cases model-driven apps. So if you are a developer or you know someone who is, you can definitely point them to that. I don't have links to that in my slide, but we can certainly find them for you. Can PowerApps be used out of the tenant? If you want to share your PowerApps with people who aren't in your tenant, the only way you could do that is through a PowerApps portal, which is something I didn't get into today. So PowerApps portals is an additional cost. It's not free, but it would give you the option to create essentially a website, and that website would be public facing. And then you would have choices as far as how people would authenticate or not authenticate. And from that, you could decide what kind of data they would have access to and what they could do with that data. There are some really good resources out there for PowerApps portals. If you guys missed it, I don't have a link right now in front of me here, but there was a entire conference this past weekend, which I did this presentation in, called the Empower Your Career Conference. I'll see if I can find the link in YouTube, but there's a whole YouTube playlist now of all the videos from that weekend. And in there are some presentations about PCFs and about Power Portals and about pretty much everything to do with Power Platform. It was really all about Power Platform. And if you're interested in getting into it as a new career, it was that was sort of the focus of the conference. But even if you're not looking for a new job, if you're just looking to upskill, those videos are fresh. They just got recorded on this weekend, so they're relatively recent. Also, 2 weeks ago, I think, John Levesque from Microsoft hosted a Power Platform online conference. That video is on YouTube. That is another great place to go if you're just getting started. And I'm trying to think what else. Any other questions?
Scott, just wondering, how much are your clients like adopting this?
Fair amount. I mean, we at AIS we are a CDS first practice, so we always push CDS first. We're not gonna sell somebody a solution that built onto SharePoint unless it's a requirement. We do build SharePoint-based solutions. Obviously, some organizations require it, but if somebody's fresh and they're just getting started and they're open to it, we really try to come in and sell them on the whole Power Platform, soup to nuts. And that Power Platform adoption framework is really the basis for what we how we sell the Power Platform. And Andrew Welsh can speak more to that than I can, but it's a big, tall task trying to explain the whole Power Platform. That's why I focused today just on PowerApps. But it's worth looking into if you guys are interested. How do I use PowerApps with my SharePoint 2013? Oh, Joe. Yeah. For those of you who are using on-premise, like Joe, there is a way to connect to on-premise data, in theory, and that's a gateway, a data gateway. That data gateway is a piece of software that would have to be running on a computer or server on your on-premise, and it would then connect between whatever data you have on-premise and the PowerApps or Power Platform in the cloud. And I'm pretty sure the data gateway is additional charges, so that would not be included in your Office 365 subscription.
I'm going to stop recording, so we have a nice even stopping point here.
Okay, just these are my my contact details. If anybody needs them, now you can stop recording.
Go ahead and give your contact info again, please.
Yeah. So this is my contact details. If you guys want to keep in touch with me, I'm on Twitter and I'm on LinkedIn. And if you have your LinkedIn app, you can scan that QR code, and if we're not already connected, and connect with me. Happy to take questions after this is all done, and you can reach out to me on either of these 2 platforms. I'm happy to answer what I can. Thank you for attending. Now you can stop recording.